right? I guess that's the easiest way to put those two. That's why those two are so beneficial, just going out in nature, because you're getting all those beautiful negative ions. But as
beaches
for that,
and trees, yeah, beaches,
yes,
trees,
all the
moving
trees,
water.
touching trees, and yes, moving water as well. Yes, that's another great one. But yeah, as for that video, yeah, so what I did was I had it was a voltage meter with the RF. It was a tri-field TF2 meter. So if anybody wants to look into that meter, you can measure electrical conductivity, you can measure magnetics and RF frequencies. So it actually works really well. Might be have maybe not been done correctly, like they're not grounded, right? Like outlets that are pinging out a ton of voltage, or just areas in your home that are pinging out a ton of radio frequencies and are hidden behind your walls. But with that video, it was a great demonstration, and I like the way that you put it, because when I did place my hand down onto the computer, which is charging, that voltage is now going through my body. And the issue with all of these studies in which we have been shown, right? Let's go with the cell phones and AirPods and smartwatches first. All cell phone studies and all things related to cell phones, AirPods, and smartwatches, all of the studies are done on a plastic dummy with water inside of it. And that's how they deem that these devices are safe, right? There's no human trials, and I'm not trying to advocate the devices. Apple and I think it's Android have a small fine print that they say that you should not use your smartphone, like literally you should not be touching it while using it. So when you
That's what the phone companies say. It says it in the settings.
There's like a little small fine print in all things when you buy every single device made by those basically two brands. There's a little small fine print that says, do not have this, next to your skin. Have it away from your body or within X amount of distance, right? So then the question is, well, then how can you use a touch screen phone if you can't touch it? It doesn't make a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. For example, the newest, let's say, go with 5G, right? So 4G was 30 megabytes per second going to your phone, right? So that's about the speed people used to get. Now with 5G, where they're trying to put basically antennas every 50 feet so that these frequencies will be pinging every 50 feet, that would be pinging at 300 megabytes per second, which is 10 times the speed. Now, let's say 4G caused a nosebleed or a headache or confusion, or let's say memory loss, because I definitely can attest to a lot of people suffering from memory loss, right? 5G would amplify that times 10, because it's 10 times the speed. And I'm just making it, simple with the numbers. But we are electrical beings, right? And we conduct electricity, and, you can shock somebody if you touch them and discharge the energy, whatever else. Then what happens when we have too much? Well, that's usually you die, right? Like you get too electrified and you're cooked, and your heart disease has just gone through the roof since the rollout of all these different types of technologies, whether it's a radio, a television, whether it's a cell phone, whether it's, these smart devices, all of these things which are getting introduced. And some people, like you said, have adapted to these technologies, right? Like maybe they're not having a symptom, so to say, but there's also a good amount of the population who are, and those would be primarily, after reading the book, The Invisible Rainbow, it dawned on me that diabetes, right? Diabetes type 1 is a person's pancreas has been electrified basically in the womb, right? Type 2 is another very interesting one that can also occur from too much electrification. And this was shown in 2002 in the country of Bhutan. They had no electric. They did everything the old school way. They used fire. They cooked all their foods from scratch. They did a ton of manual labor. They were very active. When they rolled out power plants, this was the only change, power plants in 2002 in Bhutan. 6 months later, diabetes, cancer, and heart disease all went through the roof. And it was the only change in which has occurred, right? So, for example, health issues. But in that book, he basically mentioned about that was one of the biggest ones I saw where diabetes is related to too much electricity or too much radiation. And this book goes, and I highly recommend it for every person to go into, but it goes back all the way to 1877, right? 1877 is when the rollout of the power lines came out, and they had the first influenza, quote unquote, outbreak, right? The influence from the atmosphere. So people started hearing voices. They started going crazy. They started, getting dizzy. They started getting nauseous. when people were putting a stethoscope on a baby at that time, they could hear waves, like radio waves and things that were coming out in the 1900s. They could hear those things. As 1919 approached, you had the rollout of the radio, and then you had the Spanish flu, Kansas flu, because it originated in Kansas, not in Spain. But you had that incident occur. Then you go faster into time. You go 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. You had the rollout of the television and the colored television, which also emitted a bunch of X-rays and messed people up. So as we would introduce these new forms of technology, we would pretty much get the same symptoms every single time. Some people would adapt, like you said, but then a lot of people also had a lot of health issues. And none of this was ever talked about because the actual terminology of radiation poisoning was removed from the medical literature so that other illnesses. And what I've started to learn is people are just having an electrical imbalance, right? Their cells are being twisted the opposite direction, because I just like to go with spinning. If they go to the right, they're healthy. If they go to the left, they're unhealthy. And these frequencies are causing the cells to start spinning to the opposite direction. And then people start to suffer from electrical imbalances. Health Light by Dr. John Ott. And he learned that there's 3 ways to make society weak. And that's radio frequencies, which we just talked about, wearing a wristwatch. That was another one, because the battery that's being emitted on the right arm, you can do a test and their arm would go down really easy. You have the other thing, which was fake lighting, which is what LED lighting is, and all these fake spectrum lightings, they can make us weaker. And then the last one was polyester clothes, which also emit a static toxic frequency. So when you look at those things, which are basically making society weaker over time, I did a video showing trees dying in the city, and bushes, and where like a bush will only blossom on one side. The side that's facing the towers, it doesn't blossom. There's no flowers, So this is all impacting, like you just said, like the mitochondria and the cells and everything that's of how things function. So if it's impacting plants, and it's impacting birds and causing them to be confused, and insects and pollinators and bees and all of these things, it's like then it's also going to impact humans. But like you said, going out into nature, I've found places that have absolutely zero. I found spots up in near Sedona and a whole bunch of other places that it's all 0.000. You don't even get service. There's nothing around. And I'll tell you, you go into those and like you just said, you're supercharged. And there's all worried about the climate, right? Because we always get told that one. That one's a common one on the media of the climate. It's like, well, if this is impacting all wildlife, all insects, humans, animals, and fish, and everything in the ocean, then shouldn't this be a concern? Something that you might not even be paying attention to because it might be an outlet next to your bed, or, there's meters on the other side, or even just having your microwave plugged in, because, that's another one, that it's just emitting radiation the entire time while it's plugged in, even if it's not even being in use.
Plugged in. Just
was bad, but I feel like we're going to move towards a positive notion with it, because if there's no awareness, nothing will change, because nobody knows what's actually going on.
It's
energy medicine, or healing with energy, was all outlawed when the Flexner Report came in 1910, when the Rockefellers and the Carnegies took over the entire medical system, right? They began to outlaw anything related to energy. So if you did anything energy related, your school would not get funding. And that was a big one. So anything related to energy medicine, natural healing, or anything just doing it the old school way, right? Going out into the forest and collecting herbs, that school was not going to get money. So, that's the thing too, is like you said, just even simple things like that, like energy healing can start to balance the body in a second, which is causing, like we just talked about, the irritability, the brain fogs, the clotting of the blood, all the issues that people are usually suffering from, and a lot of memory loss, right? Because Wi-Fi specifically targets the frontal cortex and impacts the pineal gland. It goes straight in through the center of the eyes, right? That's directly where it goes in. I've started to realize, because I can literally feel it right there. But sensing to that device coming into your home. So hardwiring your devices would definitely be number one. Number two would be looking at, like we talked about, your bedroom and what materials your bed is made out of. You usually want to have non-conductive materials such as wood, and then you can use other materials such as linen, such as wool, such as cashmere, or even organic cotton would be, I would say, a last resort, because organic cotton can be a little conductive. But, you can look at plans on how to build your own bed, and design your own bed so that you're sleeping on a material that's not resonating electricity the entire time or conducting at the same time. So EMF reader or a voltage meter, and check what's going on with your outlets or what's going on with your devices, because some of your outlets might not be grounded, and you can fix that so that they're not emitting, the voltage that's just probably off the charts. And then looking at your devices, making sure that you're not having any weird smart devices in your home, because I even saw a smart fridge. I was by a friend's house, and they had a smart fridge, and the microwave radiation coming off the smart fridge, that's the area in which you get your water from, which is crazy. So it's microwaving the water, but was like, basically the sound was coming off so loud from the meter, I had to turn it off. And it was exactly placed where the water is. And the biggest issue that, we also didn't talk about in this is the fact of that these frequencies are destructuring the water. And if our body is 80% water, then we're losing the hydration factor, or the hydrogen, the atom, out of our body. So then we're becoming more and more dehydrated. So it's important not to put any, devices near your water or near, where your sinks are, or if you have an electrical exchange between nature, right? Plants need our energy. That's how, they're not just there to just exist. We're meant to also exchange energy with them, and we can be very healing for them with exchanging it. It's kind of like plants that, or trees, I should say, that start to die over time because they just haven't gotten enough love or care. Right. So, going out into nature and connecting with nature is probably one of the big, an electrical exchange between nature, right? Plants need our energy. That's how, they're not just there to just exist. We're meant to also exchange energy with them, and we can be very healing for them with exchanging it. It's kind of like plants that, or trees, I should say, that start to die over time because they just haven't gotten enough love or care. Right. So, going out into nature and connecting with nature is probably one of the big, and then, like I said, birds, bees, and pollinators and all these things also pick up on that. And the other way you can mitigate, and this is the last one, is looking into electroculture, which is what I've been talking about, where you take wood and copper and make antennas and place them into the soil, and they start to balance and harmonize the area so that there's not all this weird toxic frequencies going on, and it starts to help your gardens and your plants grow faster and do all these beautiful things, but also mitigate the frequencies and all the nonsense, because now we're creating atmospheric antennas which are harnessing Earth's energy, right? They're putting out all these cell phone towers and all these antennas which are doing the opposite, and we need to start doing stuff at our level with these types of antennas to start harmonizing the area, just like they used to be all over the old world buildings that used to be up in the 1800s and 1900s. They used to have antennas all over them, and they were known as lightning rods. That's what people used to call them. But they've taken a lot of that down, so we have to start bringing those things back so we can start harmonizing our land as well, too, or trees who have lost their electrical conductivity. With the antennas, they can actually start to energize the trees, which are losing their conductivity because of all of this manipulation of frequency as well.
So the word electroculture farming, it sounds kind of technical, but it's just a wooden stick pole. The longer it is, the better, with copper wrapped around it.
That's it. And you put it in your gardens, or you put it by a tree that's not doing so well, or, maybe plants they don't have any leaves, or they haven't sprouted, or let's say you have some sprouts and you're trying to sprout to grow faster. You can use these antennas with a toothpick and a piece of copper and make a coil. Put it into those and they'll sprout quicker. This was all shown with the pyramids in Russia. They were making pyramids in Russia, and they started noticing all these beautiful plants coming back to life, extinct plants, extinct trees, all kinds of different things, different bugs, different pollinators that they haven't seen. They're like, we haven't seen this insect in whatever amount of time. And all these things started coming back. So we have to do our due diligence to also harmonize the area. Because
this little thing about why we don't have cabooses anymore on trains. And he just happened to mention that, there's electricity in this caboose, right? Well, it's not getting wireless electricity, right? It's electricity. It's for the little office desk. There's a little light there and stuff. They didn't have refrigerators back then, but the cabin was electrified. How? There's a dynamo connected to the wheel. The wheel spins, it generates electricity. The dynamo converts it. The dynamo makes it into electricity, and that works without power lines. That works without any of this huge transmission systems. We're not really allowed to utilize them. I mean, we can have our lights run with just a magnet and a coil, right? Magnet in the center, coil around it. This is like 6th grade science, right? This will turn on the light bulb. Massive cost, massive waste, and massive unreliability as well. Massive risk for unreliability, as we saw in Texas a couple of years ago, massive power outages, as we saw in Toronto twice. Toronto, the 2003 blackout, I believe it was, which knocked out all the way through New York and Ohio as well. Millions of people out of power. That was in the summer, but then it happened again in Toronto due to an ice storm. It came down as water and it froze really quickly, so it brought down a bunch of trees and they knocked lots of light in, so I can grow lots of plants inside. And it does have metal in the walls. And out here in the country, a tin roof is a status symbol. It's like, it might be ghetto in the, you just won't even see them in the city. Maybe on.
Now they just use, I think it's, I don't even know what they use, whatever stuff. The thing is, they also used to use copper too. They used to have copper roofs back in the day too, because that was another real protective one too. But that one slowly faded out because they started replacing it with usually a cheaper materials.
Yeah, copper is very expensive. A very good friend of mine, his family does very good business with copper roofs. They make copper roofs and copper eaves troughs. It's called Copper Works in Toronto.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's high end. You got to be a big timer to get a copper roof, but churches and stuff like that. And yeah, there's a reason you feel great when you walk into a church.
Yep.
I remember one time in my life, I was so depressed. I was living in this town. I didn't have any friends. What am I going to do? I'm going to church. And I couldn't believe it. But I know now there's even next levels to go to. Oh, I also wear moccasins, by the way. You mentioned.
Nice. I forgot about those ones because that's the natural material.
Yeah, I'm still cheap. I have more money now, but I am still cheap. And I'm looking at some of these like grounding shoes. I'm not paying $200 for grounding loafers, no. So moccasins made out of bison.
Yep.
I love them.
I got the same exact one. So that's probably what I literally have that pair. And then I have another one with a copper rivet inside of it. So that is
EMF proof and it does let lots of light in. So I can grow lots of plants inside. So
yeah, I can feel it. I pick up on all that. It's like instantaneous. It's like it feels like sonar.
At the end of Invisible Rainbow, he said something which I think would also sound extreme to a lot of people, but I loved it. He said, we should be getting to the point where it's normal for you to ask your guests to turn their Wi-Fi off before they come in, or turn their phone off before they come in, or leave it in the mudroom or something before they come into the house proper. Just like it's become totally normal for you to not bring a lit cigarette inside someone's house, not light up a cigar in someone's house.
No, you're right.
As much as possible so that any devices are kind of all located together. They're all wired into internet, but they're all in some sort of protective housing, like even a fridge. It's easy to have a protective housing. This could be done on the manufacturing level too, by the way. Japan and Europe are way ahead of us. There's way more consumer demand for things like magnetic beds, grounding beds, and devices that have shields in them. It usually is as simple as that, shielding that. Hey, the fridge gives off this EMF. Well, put a shield there. It doesn't need to give off a signal.
With that too, as well, on that topic, there was a document I saw. It was recently where they showed that the limits that they allow in America and in Canada are 10,000 times higher than what they allow in the EU and in Asia. So that's another big thing right there too, because if you think about like that, if they allow 10,000 times more radio frequencies, right, then they can crank things up a lot more than like even where you were saying, let's say in the EU, where there's maybe tighter regulations, or they say, we're going to lower this or we won't allow that. It's like that's something else people have to be aware of, because they might go to Europe and take a vacation and be like, oh, I feel great over here. And it's also because, well, there's a legislation or rule against allowing that much frequency to come out. In Europe and Asia, they're with frequencies and everything, and magnets and jade and ivory and all these different stones and things, they're very in tune with those things.
Well, this was another one of the reasons I stopped paying the phone bill. It's not just to lower my EMF. That was part of it. And I didn't want to pay the bill either. whatever. But I didn't want to pay these companies. I don't want to give them the money. They're doing bad things with the money. They're building this crazy infrastructure that isn't necessary. I don't know if people realize that these cell phone towers, it's not for cell phone service. It's not so you can make calls, mobile calls. It's not so you can send SMS messages. It's so you can have data. It's so you can have internet. That's what these cell phone towers are. That's the primary problem. I know that Firstenberg is hardcore on everything from radio to, cellular, like actual cell signals.
No.
Now, I would say that if we kept those, the world will still be a way better place. But we could also do radio on hardwire for the most part. Mechanical bottom and then the spout coming out of the bottom. So it forces the water to go through a vortex, basically.
Oh, those are amazing. That's actually Victor Schauberger's work of understanding vortexes. And when water goes through a vortex, it begins to structure because it goes through an anomaly where it pretty much levitates. So it begins to levitate as it goes through a spiral. So those can actually be really beneficial. And he could clean up water, clean up ponds, and structure water all at the same time, just using that simple spiraling vortex. So they're actually very, very beneficial. And a person can just, even if they want, they could actually do it even too with like a hose, right? And put it into a spiral. You know, there's a lot of DIY ways you can do it too. Or you can stir your water or drinks, for example, with a wooden spoon or a silver spoon or a copper spoon, and that can also create the spiraling vortex to structure your water as well.
And I know I said last comment.